Arizona Territory, August 1880. The sun was just starting to dip low, bleeding orange over the cracked earth when they saw her stumbling through the sagebrush with her dress torn open at the side and her hand pressed tight to her belly, blood leaking between her fingers. The 5 cowboys on horseback slowed at the sight. She was alone, barefoot, and looked half dead already. Her hair hung in matted curls down her back, and her face was pale as bone. She did not cry out. She just kept walking, one foot dragging behind the other like she had nothing left but the will to move forward. "Jesus," one of them muttered, tugging at his reins. "That woman's been shot." None of the others moved. Then one man swung down from his horse without a word, his boots hitting the dust hard, and started toward her. His name was Fletcher Ward. He was 29, tall and lean, with a sun-browned face and hands used to work. He didn't hesitate. Just walked straight to her like he knew she would fall if he waited one more second. She dropped to her knees before he reached her. "Hey," he said low, crouching fast, his voice steady but quiet. "You with me?" She looked up, dazed. Her lips were cracked. Her skin burned with fever. But she met his eyes. "Water," she whispered. Fletcher slid his canteen from his belt and lifted it to her mouth carefully. She drank in trembling gulps, her hand shaking as she held on to his wrist. "Name?" he asked. She blinked. "Georgia," she said hoarsely. "Georgia Fletcher." His brows twitched. "Fletcher," she gave a faint, broken laugh that turned into a wince. "Married name, not anymore." Fletcher looked over his shoulder toward the others. None had moved. One turned his horse and started off down the trail. "Cowards," Fletcher muttered. He turned back to her. "You got a bullet in you. I need to get you to shade." She nodded weakly, her hand still pressed to her side. Blood soaked the pale blue of her dress. Fletcher lifted her into his arms. She was light, too light. He could feel the bones through her back. She hissed in pain but didn't scream. The sun bore down hard as he carried her across the dry wash toward a stand of cottonwoods where he knew there was water. His horse followed behind without being led. He laid her down gently beside the stream, soaked his handkerchief, and pressed it to her wound. "Who did this?" "Men," she said. "3 of them. Took the wagon, left me for dead." Fletcher's jaw clenched. He didn't ask anything else yet. She needed rest, not questions. He cleaned the wound as best he could. The bullet had gone through, but it was a mess. He cut away the torn fabric and packed it with wet cloth. "You need a doctor," he said. "Closest one's in Santa Rosita. That's 2 days' hard ride." She didn't answer. Her eyes were closed. He stayed beside her the whole night, feeding her sips of water, keeping the cloths damp. She didn't sleep easy, moaned in her fever, flinched from ghosts only she could see. Once near dawn, she gripped his hand tight and said a name he didn't know, "Elijah." "Who's that?" he asked softly. "My boy," she whispered. "He's 5. They took him." Fletcher's breath caught. "Your son," she nodded faintly, tears slipping from the corners of her eyes. "And my girl, Ellen. She's 7. I hid them in the brush when the men came. I do not know if they—" her voice cracked. "I have to find them." "You will," he said. "I promise." She looked at him then, and something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but something close. A start. By morning she could sit up. Barely. Fletcher built a fire, brewed coffee, and tore strips from his shirt to bind her tighter. He found wild berries near the stream and coaxed her to eat a few. When the heat began to rise again, they set out. He made a sling with his saddle blanket and carried her across his horse, riding slow, keeping her upright in front of him. She leaned back against his chest, too weak to hold herself. "You do not have to," she said once. "I know." "Why are you?" His voice was quiet in her ear. "Because I could not ride away." They made it to a ranch house by dusk, an old friend of Fletcher's who owed him more than a few favors. The woman there, Maria, helped clean the wound properly and fed Georgia broth while Fletcher got supplies. That night, Georgia lay in a real bed, her skin less fevered. Fletcher sat by the window, keeping watch. When the wind stirred the curtains, she turned her head toward him. "I remember your name now," she said. He looked over. "You do. You rode through our town once with cattle. You bought peaches from my stand." He frowned, thinking. Then a slow smile pulled at his lips. "I remember that. I thought you were handsome." He chuckled. "You should have said something. I was married then." His smile faded, but not completely. "And now? My husband died last year. Fever took him." Fletcher nodded, watching her. "I am sorry." "I am not," she said softly. Then she looked away, embarrassed. "He was not kind." Fletcher stood and walked over, crouching beside the bed. "You do not have to talk about that." "I know," she whispered. "But I want to." She told him a little, not much, just enough for Fletcher to understand the silence she carried. And he listened, his hand resting gently on the quilt beside hers. "We will find your children," he said quietly. "I swear it." She looked at him, her eyes glassy. "Why do you care?" He met her gaze and said, "I do not know, but I do." She reached out then, slowly, and took his hand. Neither of them let go. By the second morning, Georgia was strong enough to sit upright without trembling. Her skin was no longer flushed, and her eyes had cleared. Fletcher found her on the back porch of Maria's house, wrapped in a faded quilt, watching a pair of magpies fight over a crust of bread. She didn't turn when he stepped out, but her posture shifted slightly, as if she recognized the sound of his boots. He handed her a tin cup of coffee, still warm. She took it with both hands, careful not to meet his gaze right away. "Maria said you were up before the sun," she said finally. "Had to speak to a man in town," he replied. "Name's Cowboys. He's got ears in places most men don't." "About my children," he nodded once. "A wagon passed through Santa Rosita 3 days ago, 2 children with it. The boy had a limp, girl had a locket. Description fits." Her fingers tightened around the tin. "Did he say who had them?" "They were with a man called Pike Crenshaw. Used to run horses up in Prescott. Got himself into debt with the wrong kind of folks. He's been roaming ever since. Word is he's headed east, staying off the main routes." She took a slow drink, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "He wasn't one of the men who took the wagon." "No," Fletcher said. "But he may have bought it." Silence stretched between them. Wind stirred dry grass along the fence line. "I should be the one riding after them," she said. "You're not ready." Her eyes narrowed. "I won't be kept behind like some broken thing, Fletcher." "No one's keeping you," he said, voice low. "But you try to ride now and you'll tear that wound wide open. Then you won't be much good to them or anyone." She looked away, jaw tight. Her pride had its own shape, sharp but quiet. He respected it, even when it scraped against him. He sat down beside her, arms resting on his knees. "I know someone in Winslow," he said. "Old friend who runs with the express riders. He might know Crenshaw's trail." She studied him for a long moment. "Why are you doing this?" "You already asked that." "I want a better answer." He didn't look at her when he spoke. "I grew up watching my mother wait for someone who never came back. Every day she'd walk down to the road and just stand there, hoping someone might bring news. Hoping the wind might carry him home. That's what happens when someone's stolen from you. You wait, and it eats you from the inside out." She was quiet for a time. Then softly, "Your father," he nodded. "Went out one winter to settle a debt, never returned, no body, no word. Just gone." She reached over and set her cup down on the porch. Her hand lingered near his but didn't touch it. "I didn't expect kindness," she said. "Not after what happened. I'm not doing it out of kindness." "Then what?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "Because if someone had found my mother that day, bleeding in the dirt, and walked away, I'd never forgive it." The screen door creaked behind them. Maria stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Señor Fletcher," she said, Your horse is ready." I gave him oats. Fletcher stood, brushing dust from his trousers. "Thank you." Maria's gaze shifted to Georgia. "You need anything, you call. I'll be in the back with the laundry." Georgia nodded and Maria disappeared inside. Fletcher turned to her. "I'll be back by dusk." "Stay off your feet as much as you can." She raised an eyebrow. "You always give orders to women like that." He gave a faint shrug. "Only the ones who scare me." That earned the softest curve of a smile. Not full, not yet, but it stayed there even after he rode off down the trail. She watched him until he was gone from sight. Inside, Maria had laid out a basin of water and a clean shift. Georgia changed slowly, wincing at the pull in her side. She didn't glance at the wound. There was no point. It would heal or it wouldn't. She found a brush on the dresser and worked through the snarls in her hair. When the worst of it was smooth, she sat by the window, hands in her lap, eyes scanning the trail he'd taken. By evening, Fletcher returned with dust on his hat brim and a folded paper tucked into his saddlebag. He dismounted and came straight to the porch where she sat waiting. "They crossed the Verd River 2 days ago," he said. "Headed for the Mogollon Rim. Crenshaw's got 2 other men riding with him." Her breath hitched. "And my children, they're still with him." No harm done, far as anyone can tell. Georgia stood slowly, steady on her feet now. "Then we leave in the morning." Fletcher didn't argue this time, he only nodded. "We'll need supplies, blankets, shot, food for a week." She stepped down from the porch and faced him square. "I can ride." His eyes met hers. "I believe you." And for the first time, there was something settled between them, not just a shared purpose, but the beginning of something neither of them had the words for yet. Something that didn't need to be named to be known. They left before first light, the sky still dim and gray with the hush that comes just before daybreak. Georgia rode Maria's old gelding, a steady-footed sorrel with a low gait and a calm eye. Fletcher traveled beside her. His rifle hung across his back, saddle bags stocked with dried venison, lye soap, and the slate-colored beans Maria had packed in a flour sack. The land rolled ahead in long, flat stretches of grassland broken by basalt outcroppings and narrow washes that carved the earth like old scars. They traveled without speaking for much of the morning, the rhythm of hooves and creaking leather enough to fill the space between them. Georgia's face was pale in the new light, but her posture stayed straight, her hands firm on the reins. Around midday, they stopped beneath a stand of junipers to water the horses. Fletcher unsaddled his mount and brushed the sweat from its flanks while Georgia knelt beside the shallow stream, cupping water into her palm and pressing it to the back of her neck. When she stood, Fletcher was watching her. "You favor your left side when you ride," he said. She wiped her hands on her skirt. "It pulls less. You'll open the wound if you keep twisting." "I figured that out this morning." He stepped closer, pulling a small tin from his saddlebag. "Maria gave me this. It's pine tar and bear fat." "For the skin." She didn't move as he lifted the hem of her blouse just enough to spread the salve across the bandage. His fingers were rough but gentle. She stood still, her breath shallow. "You always know what to bring," she said. "I've had practice," he answered. "Spent 3 winters trapping along the Gila. Took a musket ball through the thigh once. Had to stitch it myself with a bone needle." She looked down at the salve tin in his hand. "You ever think about settling?" He replaced the lid. "Used to." And now he met her eyes. "I don't know yet." They rode again after the sun passed its peak, heading northward where the cottonwoods grew denser near the edge of the rim. Fletcher kept an eye out for sign-broken branches, a bit of cloth, anything that might say the children had come this way. Near a bend in the trail, Georgia drew her horse to a halt. "There," she said, pointing at the ground. Fletcher dismounted and crouched beside a hoofprint shallow and wide. "Wagon wheel," he confirmed. "Fresh." less than a day old. He glanced toward the slope ahead, where the trail bent sharply into a gully thick with cedar. They're not far. As the sun dipped low, they reached a clearing where a fire had been built and left cold. Fletcher knelt beside the ashes. Still warm underneath, he murmured. They camped here last night. Georgia walked to the edge of the clearing. A strip of fabric fluttered from a thorn bush pink, frayed at one end. Her fingers trembled as she untangled it. "Ellen's," she whispered. "I tore this from her hem last spring when she got it caught on a fence." Fletcher stood beside her. "They're close. If we push hard tomorrow, we can catch up." She turned toward him, the fabric clutched in her fist. "If he's hurt them, he won't." "You can't promise that." "No," he said. "But I can put a bullet between his eyes if it's needed." Georgia's expression didn't change, but her shoulders eased, just barely. She nodded once. They made camp a short distance from the clearing, in a hollow beside a dry arroyo where the sage grew in thick clusters. Fletcher gathered fallen branches while Georgia built the fire. When it caught, she sat cross-legged beside it, her hands open over the warmth. He cooked beans and hard biscuit in a small skillet, dividing it evenly between them. They ate in silence, the firelight painting gold across her face. Afterward, she rolled her blanket out close to the flames and lay back, one arm beneath her head. "You said you used to think about settling," she said. Fletcher was still seated, his back against a rock. "Yeah. What changed?" He looked at the stars above, scattered like salt across black velvet. "Didn't think I'd find someone who'd stay." Georgia didn't answer right away. Wind stirred the branches overhead. "I stayed in a house I didn't want to be in for 9 years, she said. "Not because I was wanted there, because I didn't know where else to go." He turned his head toward her. "And now," she met his gaze, "now I know better where not to stay." He lay down beside her then, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder near his. The fire burned low and the air cooled, but neither of them moved. When she spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. "Tomorrow I get them back." "You will," he said, and after that, he was quiet a long moment. "Then we'll see." Georgia closed her eyes. Fletcher didn't sleep for a while, listening to the rhythm of her breath beside him, steady and even. He watched the fire until the last ember dimmed, and the sky turned the color of ink. Then he let himself rest, knowing morning would come faster than either of them wanted. They broke camp under a pale sky, the last embers of their fire buried beneath cool earth. Georgia moved with care, but she didn't ask for help. Fletcher watched her tighten the saddle girth with firm, deliberate hands, her expression unreadable. The silence between them that morning wasn't heavy, just full, like the pause between lightning and thunder. They followed the wagon tracks east, where the rim dropped in sharp terraces, and the juniper gave way to taller ponderosa. The trail narrowed, winding through stone and shadow. A hawk circled once overhead, then vanished behind a ridge. Around mid-afternoon, Fletcher pulled his horse to a stop, raising one hand. Georgia reined in beside him, her gaze following his. Across the ravine, nestled between two outcrops, stood a wagon. One wheel was cracked, propped up with a branch. A thin line of smoke rose from a cook fire beside it. She didn't speak, but her knuckles whitened on the reins. He scanned the clearing with practiced eyes. One man by the fire, sharpening something. Another pacing near the horses. A third half visible behind the wagon. No children in sight. Fletcher dismounted, tying his horse to a scrub pine. Georgia slid down beside him, her breath shallow. "You stay here," he said. "I won't. They don't know we're on them. If I get close, I'm not letting you walk into that alone." He didn't argue again. Instead, he unstrapped the rifle, handed her the smaller pistol from his saddlebag. "You ever use one?" "My brother taught me when I was 15, she said. "Told me to aim low and shoot twice." He nodded once, then led the way, moving along the edge of the ravine where the brush grew thick. They crept downwind, silent but for the soft rustle of their boots in the needles. Fletcher paused behind a rock ledge, peering down. From this angle he could see a canvas lean-to tucked behind the wagon, movement inside a small shape shifting under a blanket. He turned toward Georgia. There. Relief pulled at her features, but she didn't let it settle. Her eyes stayed sharp. He pointed at the man by the horses. "That's Crenshaw. I'll draw him off. When I give the signal, you go to them." "What signal?" He pulled a strip of red cloth from his pocket. "I'll tie this to the mesquite when it's clear." She nodded, jaw tight. Fletcher circled wide, keeping low until he reached the far side of the clearing. He stepped out into the open, rifle slung visible over his back, hands loose at his sides. Crenshaw looked up, squinting. "You lost." Fletcher's voice was easy. "Looking to trade. Heard you got a wagon, not for sale. Didn't say I was buying. Got fresh coffee and salt pork." "Thought you might want to talk." Crenshaw eyed him warily. "You alone, mostly." The two other men stepped closer, hands near their belts. Fletcher kept walking, slow, unthreatening. He stopped near the fire, letting the heat warm his boots. From the corner of his eye, he saw Georgia cross behind the far rocks, silent as breath. Crenshaw sniffed. "You don't smell like a peddler." "I don't dress like one either." "What's your business?" Fletcher met his gaze. "I'm here for the children." The clearing stilled. Crenshaw's hand moved fast, but Fletcher was faster. The butt of his rifle hit the man's temple before the pistol cleared his belt. Crenshaw dropped like a sack of grain. The other two lunged, but Fletcher ducked and fired once, the shot grazing the taller man's shoulder. The third turned to run and stumbled straight into Georgia, who struck him hard across the face with the pistol grip. He went down. Fletcher stepped over Crenshaw, kicked his revolver aside, and turned toward the lean-to. Georgia was already there, kneeling, pulling back the flap. A boy's head peeked out, his hair dark and tangled, his eyes wide. Behind him, a girl clutched a rag doll tight to her chest. "Ellen," Georgia breathed. "Elijah." The girl blinked once, then let out a cry that cracked something in the air. Georgia swept them both into her arms, her body shaking as she kissed their hair, their cheeks, their hands. Fletcher stood a few paces away, rifle lowered, watching. The boy looked up at him. "Who are you?" Fletcher crouched beside them. "Just a cowboy who got lucky enough to find your mama." Ellen sniffled. "Is he going to take us back?" Georgia pressed her forehead to her daughter's. "We're not going back, baby. We're going forward." Later, Fletcher tied Crenshaw and the others to the wagon wheel, leaving supplies near enough to reach when they woke. He and Georgia burned the lean-to and loaded what was usable onto the horses. The children rode double with their mother, clinging to her waist, their hands never loosening. They made camp within sight of the verd, where the water was low and slow, and the stones along the bank were warm with sun. Georgia sat beside Fletcher as the children slept near the fire, her knees drawn to her chest. "They remembered me," she said. "I was afraid they wouldn't. They never stopped being yours." She looked over, eyes unreadable in the firelight. "I don't know where to go. I can't take them back to what we had." "You don't have to. I don't have anything else." He didn't look away. "You have me." She was silent. He added, "If you want." Georgia didn't move for a long time. Then, without a sound, she leaned over, resting her head against his shoulder. He didn't speak, didn't shift. Just let the quiet hold them. The fire snapped softly. Somewhere downstream, a night bird called out, and for the first time in a long, long while, she let herself believe they might not be running anymore. The next morning, mist hung low over the river, softening the edges of stone and cottonwood. Georgia rose first, wrapped in Fletcher's coat, and walked to the water where her children squatted on their heels, tossing pebbles into the current. Elijah's limp was more pronounced after the ride, but he didn't complain. Ellen whispered to her doll and set it on a flat rock, watching it like she expected it to answer back. Fletcher sat near the fire bank, rubbing down the horses. Georgia joined him quietly, her boots damp with dew. "You sleep?" he asked without looking up. "I did," she said. "Better than I thought I could." He glanced at her, eyes squinting against the rising light. "They'll need shoes and new coats. Ellen's is half thread." "There's a woman in Pine Hollow," Georgia said. "She used to sew for my sister. Might still have a machine. Town's not far, half a day if we cut through the West Ridge." She hesitated. "Fletcher, I don't know if I can show my face there." He put the brush down and straightened. "No one has a right to judge you. They do, though." She folded her arms over her chest. "They'll see a widow with 2 children and no land, no name left but one she never chose. They'll remember what I ran from, not what I ran to." He stood. "Then let them remember it. You didn't leave because you broke. You left because you survived. That's not shameful." She looked across the river, her hands trembling slightly. "I want them to have a life, one with walls that don't echo when they speak." "They will," he said, "if you'll let me help build it." The wind pushed through the trees then, lifting her hair. She stepped closer, her voice low. "You mean to stay?" "I do." Her eyes searched his face. "You'd take us on, all of us." His reply was quiet. "I already have." That evening they reached Pine Hollow as the sun dipped behind the low hills. It was a modest town, 2 rows of clapboard buildings, a blacksmith, and a church bell that hadn't rung since spring. Georgia led the way to a small house off the main road, half hidden under a leaning oak. An older woman answered the door, her hands still dusted with flour. "Martha," Georgia said. The woman blinked. "Well, there's a face I never thought I'd see again. I need work, and my children need clothes." Martha stepped aside without another word. "Come in, then." Inside, the house smelled of bread and lye soap. Ellen clung to Georgia's skirt until Martha crouched and offered her a slice of warm cornbread. Elijah took it with wide eyes, then leaned against Fletcher's leg. Unspoken trust, settling in like it had always belonged there. Martha agreed to let them stay in the back room for a time, in exchange for Georgia helping with mending and bread making. It wasn't charity, it was quiet, mutual need. Fletcher found work 2 properties over, repairing fences and tending to a half-dozen head of cattle. Each evening he returned with dust on his boots and fresh eggs in his saddlebag. By the 3rd week, Georgia stood behind the counter of the mercantile, her hands steady as she measured sugar and folded brown paper around beans. She didn't flinch when townsfolk came in. Some looked away. Some nodded politely. A few smiled. One evening, as the children played beneath the porch, Fletcher carved a small pine horse for Elijah. Georgia sat beside him, watching the shavings fall in curls to the floor. The air was still warm, but the sky hinted at an early autumn. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The trailing, the quiet." He leaned back in the chair. "Sometimes, but not like I thought I would." "What changed?" He looked at her, his voice slow, certain. "You did." She took his hand then, not with hesitation, but with something earned. She folded her fingers through his and leaned in. "I want to marry you," she said. He blinked. "You sure?" "I've lived a life where I was told what I was worth. I want to choose what I'm worth now, and I choose this." She glanced inside where her children slept curled together in quilts. "I choose you." Fletcher's hand tightened around hers. "Then we'll make it a good life, not perfect, not soft, but honest and full." The wedding was modest. A preacher from the next town over, a borrowed blue ribbon for George's hair, and Ellen carrying a basket of wildflowers. Elijah stood beside Fletcher, his small hand stuffed into his coat pocket, trying to look serious. They were married under the oak tree behind Martha's house, with the wind rustling dry leaves around their feet. No fanfare, no music, just the words, and the hands held tight and the promise that this time nothing would be taken. Georgia wore a dress Martha had let down and re-hemmed. Fletcher wore his best shirt, scrubbed clean at the collar. When they kissed, it was the kind that didn't rush. The kind that said, "We've waited long enough." That night, with the children tucked in and the house still, Georgia stood in the doorway of their room, watching Fletcher light the last lamp. He turned to her, his face golden in the flicker. "You look like someone I dreamed up," he said. She stepped in, closing the door behind her. "You feel like someone I built from nothing." They didn't speak more that night. They didn't need to. Years passed. Georgia took over the mercantile when the owners retired, and Fletcher grew vegetables in neat rows behind their home. Ellen learned to read, and Elijah walked straighter with every spring. They built a porch swing that creaked in the wind and raised chickens that squawked at the dawn. Some evenings, they sat on the step, shoulder to shoulder, watching the sky turn violet. Georgia would lean into his side and rest her head there, and Fletcher would press a kiss to her temple, always gentle, always sure. And the life they made was not loud, not grand, but it was theirs. It was home.